Hey folks, so today we're going to discuss the 5 precepts. What are they and how should we work with them? Coming up. Hey, so I'm Doug Smith. I'm study director for the Secular Buddhist Association at secularbuddhism.org. And if you're interested in helping to try to promote a wiser and a kinder and a less stress-filled world, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll have videos out like this every Monday and most Thursdays, trying to illuminate some of these ideas of secular Buddhism, early Buddhism, and related philosophies. And one of the most important of these has to do with the precepts, the 5 precepts. Most important because this was teaching that the Buddha would give to everybody, including lay people. It's kind of one of the earliest teachings the Buddha would give to anybody. So they're ones that we should keep in mind. It's also important to say that the 5 precepts is kind of it's the basis of Buddhist ethics, but it's not the sort of thing that we should think of in terms of commandments, which is normally the way we would think of them in a Western tradition, right? We have the idea of 10 commandments, 10 things that God said that everyone had to do, so that if you did these 10 things, if you kept these 10 commandments, that God would be nice to you. And I think many of us react against that in a negative way. It doesn't seem to us to be very reasonable. And so some of that residual kind of reaction can spill over into any idea of 5 precepts. 5 precepts, however, are not meant to be commandments. The Buddha was really pretty clear about this. The whole point of them was that they were practices, and that they were practices that were supposed to be skillful. That is to say, if you followed these kinds of practices, you would find yourself a generally happier person in a generally happier world. So to that extent, it's not the kind of thing that we should think of as an all or nothing kind of, there's a God out there watching you, and he's going to decide exactly if you've crossed some line or not. The point is to try to do your best. But in general, this is a baseline practice for everybody. And within the Buddha's day, within the Buddha's context, lay practice basically amounted to keeping the 5 precepts. There was not much else. Lay people were not expected to do meditation. They were not expected to follow the wisdom part of the path. They were expected at least to keep the precepts. So, and one of the things that I think is also congenial about these precepts is that they're really pretty reasonable, pretty secular, really. I mean, they are secular in the sense that to compare them with the 10 Commandments, where the first one is about God, is about keeping a particular idea of God as being unique and in some way uniquely open to worship. The 5 precepts don't have anything like that. So many of us are familiar with them, but just in case you aren't, the precepts are don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, or don't do wrong speech. Wrong speech is a slightly larger topic than lying. It involves using harsh speech or using divisive speech or gossiping in a way that's not useful. The 4th one is don't commit sexual misconduct. And the 5th one is not to use intoxicants, in particular not to use alcohol, and we'll get to that in a minute. Now, to an extent, these are the kinds of ethical groundings that we find in every ethics around the world, with the possible exception of the 5th one, of course, but the other 4 are ones that are just pretty much universal. And we can ask ourselves, to a lot of us, these may seem the kind of things that we say, oh yes, I never do these. I never kill people, I never steal anything, I don't try to lie generally, don't commit sexual misconduct. But I think, these are practices, so we have to think about them in a broader kind of context. To what extent do we kill insects, for example? We may feel that we need to in order to keep our houses clean, of course. And these are all things we have to work with as practices. We may say, oh, I don't steal, I don't accost people on the street and take their pocketbook. But, to what extent are we taking things, maybe even little things from our office or our job, they're not going to miss, and, using them for ourselves? And again, we may not overtly lie about things, but, we can use divisive speech sometimes. We can use harsh speech sometimes in situations where it's really not useful. And when it comes to the 5th precept, which is either intoxicants is the broader category if you like, sort of a modern repurposing of the fifth precept, or within the early Buddhist context, alcohol in particular. A couple of issues with this. The interesting thing is that in the Eightfold Path, this is right action. And I have a video on right action I can link up here. That doesn't include the 5th precept. The right action is only the first 4. And I think this kind of feature is what is what tends to recommend people like Bhikkhu Bodhi, who is a very eminent translator and interpreter of the early texts, and a traditional believer in many ways. It's what leads him to say that the reason the fifth one is on there is because it leads to our tendency to violate the other four. And I think this is a very reasonable take. In other words, when we drink too much, this tends to lead us to do rash things, which includes sexual misconduct, but it certainly also includes rash speech, harsh speech. It may include stealing things. It may include killing people. And I think we all know the social danger that alcohol can provide. Now, that said, I will put my cards on the table here that I have a drink or two of wine with dinner. And from my own practice, my take of the fifth precept is to avoid drunkenness. The problem with drunkenness is that at that point, we sort of cross a kind of a fuzzy line where our actions are out of our control. But that line will be different for every person. And of course, for some people, particularly those who are prone to addiction, the idea of having any alcohol at all is a problem. And so I think even from the point of view of somebody who has a drink once in a while, it's quite reasonable that from a broader social context or societal context, it would be reasonable to say, avoid alcohol, because it can be a problem for so many people. So the basic idea with these 5 precepts is to use them as general templates of practice that give us an insight into the kinds of acts that we should avoid doing, because they're the kinds of acts that tend to be promoted by greed and hatred and ignorance. Finally, I just want to say, I think, one word about a very important topic when any of this stuff about ethics comes up, which is self-righteousness. I think a lot of people, both within the secular world, the external world of all of us, but also very much within the traditional world, a lot of people can get caught up in a sense of self-righteousness when it comes to ethical issues. A sense of, I'm doing it better than you, of my practice is better than your practice. A moment's thought will realize that a lot of that would fall under the auspices of wrong speech, which is a harsh or divisive speech. Of course, sometimes harsh speech can be useful. If somebody is behaving badly, sometimes a harsh word is necessary to correct them, to put them on the right path. But the right way to speak is to speak at the right time, in the right place, with the right intention. That is with an intention of benevolence, an intention of loving kindness, if you like. If, on the other hand, the intention is one of self-righteousness, of ego, of feeling like I'm better than you, that is not going to be the most helpful way of approaching the situation. When we keep in mind these issues of the 5 precepts, we should keep them in mind first and foremost as a personal practice, one that we may fall short of from time to time and in various ways, but one that we try to investigate as it illuminates the ways that we can become more generous, become more benevolent, and more filled with metta or loving kindness, and more wise. Because in the longer term, that gets us where we want to be. And so in many ways, and for many of us, this is the basic practice, the practice of the precepts. So I hope that discussion's been helpful for you to get a bit more insight into the precepts. If you're new to the channel, welcome. I'm really, really glad to have you here. Thanks all of you so much for your kind comments and your kind questions. It's wonderful to interact with all of you on a daily basis, whether it's on YouTube or on one of the other places that these things are posted. It's really wonderful, and thank you so much for being here, and we will catch you on the next one. So bye-bye.